Welcome back live, ladies and gentlemen. It's the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. I'm your host, Rob Moore, here keeping the all-seeing eye of Horus on the secular movement. With me, not as always, but for the first time in several weeks, our old friend Brian Edward. What's going on today, Brian?
I'm resurrected
Yeah.
from nowhere.
Well said. It's a kind of a rainy, crappy day today here in Milwaukee as we podcast, as always, from the second floor of the Grand Avenue Mall, downtown, the Bucket Works location. And thanks to those fine people for helping us put on the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. And if you like what we do, and we know you do, we want to ask you, of course, to support us at the Patreon page and look for us, Mythicist Milwaukee, on Patreon. You can pledge as little as $1 a show, $1 a week, work it to your custom taste, and help us keep bringing you exciting secular guests from around the globe. Tonight, we have a upcoming secular author. He doesn't look young enough to drive, or doesn't look old enough to drive, I got to say. I expect these wizened professors and wrinkled philosopher types and, experienced activists. And here we got a baby-faced author. He's already had 3 or 4 books out, one of which I love, the title. It's simply Disproving Christianity, which I love the title of that one. I think that Christianity is real, disproving the myth arc, maybe. We'll talk to him about what that is. I'm pretty convinced that it's actually real, though, as a religion. And Mom, Dad, I'm an atheist. Please welcome to the program David McAfee. What's going on, David?
Thank you. Not much. Doing great. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. You have degrees in English and religious studies from the University of California at Santa Barbara. Is that right?
That's correct.
We're looking into your bio a little bit, of course, brushing up on you before you got here, and it seems like you were never really religious, but always interested in religion. Is that true?
That's pretty accurate. Yeah, I would say that from the day that I realized that all the people around me took religion seriously, I really became even more interested. I was raised by my grandparents and parents were all Christians, and they all took me to church, but for whatever reason, out of my own ignorance or I don't know what it was, but I just never took it seriously. I never thought that the stories we heard were real. It was like a fun daycare for me. And then when I realized that when I told my grandma I didn't want to go to church and she told me I was going to go to hell, I just got really confused. I started becoming more interested in what people believed and why. And so from that day on, I started going to churches maybe 3 or 4 times a week instead of once a week, and became a lot more interested.
So what brand of Christianity was that? Your grandma was a fundamentalist or more liberal?
My grandma was a Baptist Christian, and the church we went to tended to be non-denominational. They were just sort of all-inclusive, but that meant that there were all sorts of denominations in there. So there were Pentecostal people. I saw people speaking in tongues, and then there were also very liberal Christians, all within the same building. So that was pretty interesting for me.
Wow. Did you attack it from a sense of fear that, wow, I'm going to hell, or, wow, this is really interesting?
It was definitely the interesting factor. I never believed in hell. I can't remember a time in my life when I believed in hell or heaven or gods or anything really. I really did see it. I thought it was like a daycare situation, especially because my sisters and I were sent there, and we went to a different area than the adults, and they gave us lots of candy, and we played trivia games and won Jesus bucks and stuff. It all seemed really like a joke to me, like just something to do.
Was Jesus on the 100 or like the 50? Like Abraham might have been on the 1. I'm just guessing.
So,
Jesus bucks.
I think Jesus was on all of them.
Okay.
And you could buy all sorts of candy and time on the trampoline in the back and stuff, and so it was definitely fun for me. I really enjoyed it. And then when I learned that people believed all the stuff, I became more interested in it because from that perspective too. So now I wanted to go to get all the candy and stuff, but also to find out why people believed all that, because I knew already that from experiences at school and other things that people believe different stuff. So just understanding that people can believe so firmly in something that has never been shown to exist, and that their neighbors believe the complete opposite, was always really interesting to me.
Well, don't you think it's a tactic of these religions to make it fun, and you sort of sidestep the questioning part of it if you make it like a social event and kids kind of show up, have a good time, and end up indoctrinated. I think you were probably just a little bit smarter than that. But don't you think that's a purposeful tactic?
Definitely. In Disproving Christianity, I write a little bit about that experience, about going to church. And I mean, the fact that I remember mostly the candy and the games and stuff really does say something about the indoctrination process in general. And you can't say that it's really less effective, because my sisters are still Christians and they went to the same church system as I did and ended up doing exactly what you said. They just end up indoctrinated from being in that surrounded by all those teachings all the time. It just sort of happens for most people. And I won't say it's because I'm smarter or anything. It might even be because I was so dumb that I didn't realize people took it seriously early enough. But for whatever reason, I just happened to not fall into that trap, and it made me more interested in it to see my family all go in that same direction, and me never having believed it at all. It made me want to know what made all these people such strong believers, and in almost every case, the answer was childhood indoctrination or otherwise introduction to those ideas when they were really young.
So do you have a sense of Holden Caulfield kind of saving these people from the phenomenon, or is it really just more about the study, more about the actual way that it affects these people's minds? You seem more laid back about it than I would be if my sisters were still indoctrinated.
Yeah, for me, I'd say it's more about the study than anything else, because I've seen religion be a positive force in people's lives before, and I've seen people change for the better using religion as a tool to do that. And I'm not saying that there aren't secular therapies or secular ways that they couldn't have done that, but I think any way to improve your life, improve your actions in this life are good. So I've seen the negative effects as well. I mean, we could turn on the news or look in a history book and see all the negative effects of religion. So the fact that they span all across the spectrum on that makes me more of I advocate for clear thinking, for rational thinking, and when you apply that to religions, you get some people who are able to have, because of the nature of religion, you're able to cherry pick whatever ideas you like. So if you're a good person, you cherry pick the good ideas and you'll end up with a positive system. And so I don't have anything against those uses of religion. It's only when it affects my life or when it's introduced into legislation that I really have a big problem with it.
And one of the first things that comes up when we Google you is the statement that you feel that atheists should stop trying to destroy religion, and you've just sort of led us to that topic with your last statement. Talk to us about that a little bit, because you do obviously have a higher tolerance for when you even talk about the good side. Most atheists are really ready to be done with religion, or at least just put it in the closet. Please keep it in your church. Go ahead and talk to us about that. Do you think atheists are being a little too strong on that point?
Definitely. I've gotten a lot of pushback on this, but it's something I feel strongly about, so I'm happy to talk about it. The reason I decided to write that piece on why we shouldn't destroy religion is because somebody sent me a message on Facebook saying that they thought the only way to, quote, cure the world of religion would be to eliminate every man, woman, and child who is religious. And at first I ignored the message. I just didn't take the person seriously. He wrote me again and again and again, and he claimed to have a military background, and he said that he thought he was the one who could really do this, who could really kill all the religious people and make this world a better place. And the more that I read his messages and he begged me to talk to him about it, I felt like I had an obligation to do so. And so I put together my arguments, and I showed him that even if he were to do that, to kill every single religious person, the idea of religion, the idea of superstition, these things are built into us. We would create new religious systems. We would actually, as long as books exist, we will always revamp the old ones as well. So religion has existed for as long as we've had thinking capacity as human beings. There's no reason to believe that it's going to disappear, especially since the majority of people are religious. And so it seems to me like a fruitless endeavor to try and destroy religion in general when you can try to reform it. You can try to work with religious people to make sure that they fight against the fundamentalists of their own religion. So you don't end up with things like teaching creationism in schools, and you don't end up with suicide bombings and all these impediments to scientific advancement. Those things are what we should be fighting against, and not religion in general, because there are religious people who are scientists, who do great things, who do all sorts of positive things in the world, and to eliminate the religious part of that doesn't make sense in every situation. So I'm just calling for a more inclusive approach where we try and bring everyone together and look at the negative aspects and fight against those, because religion itself is, it's just as bad as any other false idea. It's not any special type of wrong. It's just somebody who's mistaken, and they can use that for good or for bad.
Right. I think modern day, the religion serves the function of creating a good narrative of what's going to happen after you die. I think we're the only animals that can be consciously aware of our mortality. So
that we know of.
Yeah, that there's another life out there is comforting, and that's fine. I'm fine for people to have that, but I'm not fine if things like, gays need to stay in the closet, gays can't get married, we need to stone gays, gets wrapped up with this.
I completely agree. That's exactly it. And you have no problem with people believing for their own comfort, because it's just a belief. It's just like somebody believing something else that's wrong. It's like they believe they live on the second floor when they live there. They're obviously wrong. You can spend a lot of time, but really affect your life.
Right.
And it might be better for other people, and ideas are actually damaging.
Kind of cutting in and out here.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out a little bit. You got a cell signal?
Let's hope it comes back here.
You there, David?
One of the things I wanted to ask him was a blogger, a British blogger, Theremin Trees, makes the argument that some of the reason why religion doesn't want to be questioned is because if you take away the fantasy of like the heaven, or have a competing fantasy like reincarnation, like the religion is the drug that makes you feel good, but it only makes you feel good if everybody's taking it. Everyone else needs to shoot up, because if nobody believes you, you're just crazy. But if everyone believes you, it works a lot better. So keep your dissent to yourselves is a good way to say, wow, I don't have to look at it. I don't have to be as afraid. And that's an interesting topic.
Yeah, and that's a good way to describe it.
It says we've lost our internet connection. Reconnection.
Nice,
With
nice.
4
We'll try to
seconds.
hook
3,
back up with
2,
him.
1.
It makes sense that people would want to tolerate the good that religion does, or talk about the fact that it's not always bad in every case. And of course, as atheists, we lose sight of that fact a little bit. But I guess I would challenge him on the play devil's advocate by asking him if it doesn't harm society to allow people to continue to fool themselves. I guess that's the only way I would approach that.
Well, that
does
would
it really
be
help
okay.
them?
No, I think it can. It absolutely can, but as long as that's a personal matter. Sure. I mean, if you want to believe X happens when after you die, and otherwise, are we not connected to the internet at all? Is it you? Okay, we are back. Small internet snafu. I won't spill out that acronym over the air. But one of the questions I think would have been worth asking him when we get him back here is, that religion can exist. I think for people's sanity, and that how do I deal with death? This is hard to deal with. Having that fantasy does help some people.
Well, it's been shown for millennia now that. Hey, you back?
Yep.
Our fault. Our internet went out here in the studio, and we've been scrambling furiously to get you back on the line, so I apologize for that.
The internet gods were not looking favorably upon us.
Taking their revenge.
I don't know what's cutting out. It seems normal over here.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it's simply on our end.
Yeah, the problem's on our end. It's cut rate. We're in Milwaukee here. We just got electricity a couple of years ago.
Right.
But, you were talking about religion being not all bad, and I think you've got a real California. Are you from California, or you just live there now?
I'm from California. I was born in Sacramento, and I went to Santa Barbara for college, and now I'm living in Los Angeles.
So you got that great live and let live attitude where, some of the East Coast atheists that we meet just want to take a scythe and cut off religion right at the knees.
But to that point, the Mr. Genocide that you were talking to, that's many times the reasons why people could become irreligious is when you see the God of the Bible killing everybody with a giant flood, or pounding Sodom and Gomorrah, and killing. That innocent babies died in there. This is what makes it not add up. So obviously, some sort of solution to that is just as ugly as any of the problems itself.
Yep, and I think a lot of people also, they get confused. A lot of non-believers they don't believe these stories, but then they get so mad at. I've seen non-believers get mad at gods that don't exist. They're like, well, he killed all these people. This is really, you believe this is just a story. I believe this is just a story. We know that this genocide of blood didn't happen. Didn't happen by God. So there's no reason to be angry about it. It's just a story from a certain time. It was stolen from another culture's story. So to me, I think that people get angry about the wrong things. And I think what you brought up earlier, when religion is used to discriminate against people, we should be worried about and what we should be fighting against. And I am completely in favor of that.
But it seems like there's a lot of defense against some people that may try to justify, say, no, the flood was real, or Jesus was real, or whomever, and the Exodus is real. But when you take out some of the pillars holding up the idea that there's an afterlife and that you've got the right religion, it makes, if one falls, the whole thing could potentially fall as well. And I think that's where you get the pushback, because you're kind of wrecking the fantasy. You're wrecking the illusion.
I do completely agree on that, and that's actually the thesis of my first book of Disproving Christianity. And no, I'm not trying to disprove Christianity as a religion. I do know that it exists. But disproving the tenets of Christianity, disproving the ideas that the foundation on which the religion is built. And like you said, when one of those things is removed, it really, as it should work, if you disprove one key principle of any idea, then the rest should fall down like a house of cards. With religion, you see people really clinging to these ideas, though, despite the fact that numerous inaccuracies and contradictions can be found in the Bible, they'll always find a way to justify it. So with Disproving Christianity, I tried to just get kind of not comprehensive at all, more like a pocket guide toward contradictions in the Bible, in the Old and New Testaments, and in contradictions between what's taught in the Bible and how Christians think that their religion is today, and how it causes them to behave today as well. So that's what that book is all about, is showing people the inaccuracies so that hopefully they can think about it a little bit more. At the very least, just think about the ideas. But I'm never mad at the inaccuracies or mad at the Noah story, even when I write about why it's not real. The anger part is what I'm talking about, because that anger sometimes gets redirected towards people, and that turns to hating believers. Right. I've seen a lot of all believers, anyone who believes, and I just can't get behind that. I've seen so many great people who happen to believe in one thing or another that I can't get on that super anti-theist bandwagon.
It always occurred to me that Disproving Christianity could be a really short book. I always wondered how. I mean, since we know, and correct me if I'm wrong, we know scientifically, whether people choose to believe in creationism or not, we know that Genesis did not happen as it is depicted in the Bible.
Right.
We know that part is a myth. Okay, we already know that the world was created in a much different way than is described in Genesis. So when you take out that part, what did Jesus die for? There's no original sin. Right there, to me, the whole myth arc falls apart. Is there a lot more to it than that? Or can you synopsize how you disprove Christianity?
Basically, you should be correct. Like I said before, if you disprove something so innate, something so important to the religion, then that should be enough. But when I wrote the book, the reason that I wrote it was because I was talking to my grandma, who was a religious fundamentalist, who did believe that the earth was 6,000 years old and did believe in the Genesis story that you're referring to. And I thought, well, if I could just show her one really clear inaccuracy, then she can't say that the Bible is completely flawless. She can't claim that anymore. So I was going to school for religious studies at the time, and I wrote an essay that kind of outlined, I think that was the first one I tackled, was the Genesis myth. And I even went into its origins, showing historically where it came from, because that's what I specialized in school, was looking at where religions touched each other and how they. And I showed her this, and she read through, and she said, I still believe that the Bible is 100% perfect and accurate and flawless. And I was like, all right, well, I got to get another one. So each couple weeks, I would come to her with a new essay disproving another component of Christianity. And she never caved in. She never said that it wasn't, she never said that it was a flawed document or anything. But through those essays, those were the beginnings of Disproving Christianity. So I just kind of compiled them all together at the end and put them into one book. So you're right, it should just be one, but because people are such firm believers when it comes to religion, she's been a Christian since the day she was born in her eyes. And so it does take a lot more. So I didn't cover every inaccuracy or flaw in the Bible, of course, but I did tackle a lot of things that I thought were clear contradictions or clear problems that a lot of people don't know about, like the age limit in the Bible. It says that we can only live to be 80 years old, and then after the flood it says we can only live to be 120 years old, and we've had people who've lived longer than both of those. So there's a lot of just things that are really difficult to work around, and of course masters in apologetics will try to do just that. But if you're a literalist, a biblical literalist like my grandma, then there's really no way to work around certain flaws in the Bible, and that's what I tried to do with that book.
No, there really isn't.
You could have named the book Disproving Christianity like 50 times.
A whole host of arguments, pardon the pun. What do you make of the folks, Bill O'Reilly's one of them, that says, no, it's a philosophy. Really, this is a tried and true philosophy. We ought to keep going with it. Look at what it's done for us. And then they cite, the Renaissance in Western Europe, so on and so forth. In some ways, I see this as troublesome. In some ways, I think it's a good thing, because at least you get it out of the realm of divine, and now it's debatable, and we should, blasphemy goes out the window. What do you think about this?
I think that's not unique to Christianity, and it's actually really common for people these days, at least, to try and separate what they believe from a religion. And they use the word philosophy, and it's convenient because, yes, religions are philosophies. Every single religion also has built-in philosophies. Does that mean that they're not religions, though? And the answer is no, they're both. They have supernatural concepts, they have moral codes, they have these things that make them religions. And same goes with Buddhism, where you'll hear people claiming that that's just a philosophy. It doesn't matter whether you use it as a philosophy or you only utilize those aspects, but the fact that it's a religion doesn't change. And I published an essay about that recently with the Richard Dawkins Foundation on how religion is still, or Christianity is still a religion. It's not a philosophy. It's not a relationship or any other new word that you want to give it. In general, though, like you were saying, if it is causing people to use it more as for the philosophical aspects, then that's great. If lots of people in history have used the Christian Bible and cut out the supernatural components and used it as sort of a basis for their morality or how they treat others without any of the dogma or the supernatural requirements or anything like that, and if they're going more toward that, then that's great. I have zero problems with anyone doing that.
Right. I guess the only problem is now the content becomes key, and that you don't have to believe in anything supernatural to see the Bible condoning slavery. And you could use this in the argument, and say in the early antebellum America to say, yeah, no, this is okay.
Yep, and
clearly
then
it's not.
I mean, with the nature, I love holy books because you can use certain parts of Scripture, anybody can, to justify just about anything, because they're not a fluid. It wasn't written by one person with one thesis. It was written by so many people over so much time that there are passages that would be considered anti-slavery, and there are passages that would be considered pro-slavery. And so it just depends on what side you personally happen to stand on, that you use those to justify whatever you happen to believe in. And for me, looking at Christians in modern day, I see a lot of people who completely ignore what we would, the stuff that they would say is out of context if you bring it up. The ancient rules for cultural Christians or cultural Jews at that time, and they just focus on the good stuff, and I have no problem with that either. But like I said, you can justify anything. So any topic if you give me, with my knowledge of the Bible, I could probably find a couple passages to support it and go against it. And so it doesn't work very well as a moral code for that reason.
Right. My only problem with the cultural context argument is I always come back, well, why is God pandering to the cultures of 2,000 years ago? It just doesn't seem very deity-like to, assign them these rules there. It knocks out the whole eternal God is unchanging argument.
I personally agree with you. I don't want opposite because I do agree with you, but I also know what they would say to that, and I know that more than anything that doesn't conflict with what Christians today believe, because they have to read their Bible and see that God has made a huge transformation between the Old Testament and New Testament, and there's no real way to get around that other than, God is changing, God is evolving, God is whether it's for our benefit or for his own, he's not the ever-present, all-knowing deity that you think of. And there's no justifying that. So I'd say most Christians who would have to, in some sense, admit that God has changed over time, which, like you said, to me, it doesn't compute for a deity.
Right.
If I were all-knowing and all-powerful, I don't think my morals would evolve over time.
Right. And then I think, so long as you can arrive at this point, and if they would come back, and I hear this often, that it's just so complicated that we can't possibly understand it, and that you just say it's impossibly complex. Okay, true, but now you've got to say, well, then you probably don't understand the same laws of God either. So we shouldn't necessarily always put them into practice, especially on non-believers. So I think you can get to a range of personal religion.
Yes, I agree with that.
You're listening to the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. It's about 2:30. We are talking to David McAfee from Los Angeles today. He's a young author, and he's written a few books. We want to remind everyone about the Myth Information 2 conference coming up on September 27th here in Milwaukee. It's at the Holiday Inn Riverfront.
Pre-party on the 26th.
Pre-party on the 26th. You don't want to miss rubbing elbows with Killer Priest. I don't know who wouldn't pay $35 for the pleasure of that.
Is that a literal rubbing of elbows or a metaphorical one?
I think it's a literal one. If you're brave enough and tall enough, you can rub an elbow with a Killer Priest. And of course, all of us are really excited as huge Wu-Tang fans to hear what he has to say in his first lecture on religion, public lecture anyway, along with Mandisa Thomas, who's going to be here too. She's the founder of Black Non-Believers nationwide and a rising star in the secular movement. Our headliners, along with great mythicist David Fitzgerald, really wonderful speaker, engaging, funny, and local talent, Arthur George from Lake Forest, Illinois, to talk about the mythology of Eden. Are you coming out for the Myth Information Conference, my friend, David?
Oh, I'll be there.
Yeah, good. We'll have a seat for you if you come out. You will not have to pay to be there.
High-speed rail, all the way.
Tell us about the Jesus myth theory. Are you? I think it's pretty clear that you're a mythicist at heart. Do you believe Jesus was a historical figure in any way at all?
I personally don't have any beliefs one way or the other on that. I think it's pretty likely that either scenario could be the case. It wouldn't be surprising at all to hear that there was a Jewish preacher or multiple Jewish preachers around that time period who went in similar areas and said similar things, and that those stories were compiled later. And I don't think it would be a stretch of the imagination to say that it was made up by a few people and then spread and grew in that way. So I don't really know, and I also don't think it's very important, only because we have figures like Paul Bunyan in our times right now. We have characters like Paul Bunyan who they are heroes and they are legends, and he's a giant with a blue ox and all these things that probably and definitely didn't happen. But was there a guy who was once named Paul Bunyan who was really strong? I don't know, maybe, but I don't think it's relevant to the question as to whether he's a deity or not, and that's what I like to focus on, because I think that that's the more important question, in my opinion, and the question that we can definitely answer with a no.
That's a good point.
I'm glad you brought up the parallel to the modern mythologies of our culture, because it's something that doesn't get talked about when these mythicists get going on their ancient stories. We tend to forget that the same thing goes on today in all modern countries and all modern societies, and I imagine 300 years from now there'll be myths revolving around I don't know Michael Jordan, or people come to mind who may have been real, but they're
Kim Jong-il's a good example.
Which one?
Kim Jong-il. There's already
There you go.
crazy myths about Kim Jong-il,
There you
about
go.
his existence, about his virgin birth, even.
Yeah.
So it's very
Right. The
similar.
bird sang in Korean, I believe.
These are urban legends, and that to me it points out that the same kind of thing is going on. That's always gone on. Do you, as part of Disproving Christianity, do you utilize these the mythicist research as far as the parallels from more ancient religions that are clearly copied and rehashed Hollywood style in the Judeo-Christian myth arc?
I don't address the Jesus mythicism argument in Disproving Christianity, and the reason I did that is because I was presenting in that book stuff that was agreed upon by religious studies scholars, and every argument that I put forth, I tried to look toward what the majority of people who understood the Bible even better than I do said about the topic. And although I haven't seen any actual reliable, what I would call reliable evidence that Jesus existed in real life, I have looked at the data, at the percentages of religious studies professors and scholars who do agree with it, and it's considered a consensus at this point. So while I don't use that argument as, well, it's consensus, so it's true, I did think, well, I shouldn't put it in the book because it doesn't go along with my general thesis. But with a lot of things that are copied from the Genesis creation narratives that we discussed earlier is a good example. We can actually pinpoint where the stuff was taken, where it was created, and how it was invented, and we can pretty much prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And so those are the types of ideas that I was interested in putting forth in that book.
Right. Sometimes I wonder if 500 years from now, if people will really think that Al Gore did invent the internet. Yeah, figure that. I stole
Probably.
that from Robert Wool, but I wonder what do the Vatican scholars know? Often I hear that, well, I'm not super educated in this, but how could this possibly exist? The Vatican has a lot of money, they do a lot of research. Somebody knows. It's just I haven't met that person. I hear from a lot of theists, but do these guys publish? Do you know what the Vatican does know? Because sometimes the scholars and the priests may be informed very differently.
What they know as far as the Jesus mythicism, or about
the accuracy
history in general?
Yeah, the accuracy of the Bible. Say I've heard the Acts of the Apostles is a forgery, for example, and that's widely agreed upon. But does that include like Vatican scholars and as well? Do they publish?
It's with the history of the Bible, it's particularly interesting because there are forgeries, but there are also just lost gospels. There are things that didn't happen to get in because of the formation of the Catholic Church. I think that the answer is I don't know what they know. I don't have any access to their information, but I do know that over the last couple thousand years, the one group that had a pretty consistent record of what's been going on would be the Catholic Church. They're the ones that held the first councils. I'm not saying that they still have records going back that far, but any good system is going to have some sort of record-keeping process. And so they have records. We, even religious studies scholars today, have records of what was put into the Bible early on and taken out. We have Gospels that were included in the original scriptures that today nobody's ever heard of because early councils took them out because they sounded too far-fetched.
Mm-hmm.
One example of those is a resurrection account of Jesus where the cross that he was crucified on becomes gigantic. It's enormous, like it's 50 people high, and it starts talking, and it's talking to people, and there's an interaction that happens in the scripture, and this was something that was originally in the Bible, and it was removed on purpose by a council who said that it was too far-fetched for people to believe, and they left in other scriptures at that time. And this isn't stuff that's like only hidden by the Catholic Church and that we don't know about. This is well-known information that we can look up. So to imagine what else they have access to would be pretty crazy. I'm interested to know.
Wow.
The irony is you can get a 50-foot talking cross at Walmart for Christmas now.
Wow, you really are a coupon picker. Impressive.
Sean's written down some points, I think, from your research. You've written 2 other books. Tell us about those. Do they have something in common? Are they both for children of different ages? The Belief book, of course, I'm talking about, and the fantastically named Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist.
Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist is deceptively titled because people think it's for kids who are talking to their parents, but it's really not for anyone in particular. I wrote Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist after I experienced religious discrimination at UC Santa Barbara, and I was their religious studies graduate program after 4 years after I completed successfully the bachelor's program, and I did very well, and I never had any problems. But when I met for a pre-application meeting with the Dean of Admissions, she Googled my name in front of me as I sat in her office, and I saw the Amazon page pop up for my first self-published book, which was Disproving Christianity. And I saw her click on the link and look at the book cover and then turn to me and say, I need to word this carefully. I don't think you'll fit in with this department's milieu because you're an atheist activist with an axe to grind. And so after that experience, I wrote a couple essays about it, and it was picked up by the Washington Post and stuff like that. And I ended up getting an apology letter from a school. But I decided to write Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist about how to be openly a non-believer in an open space, whether it's at home to your family or whether it's at school or at work. Whatever it is, it's going to come up that somebody will assume you're religious or will ask you what church you go to or ask you something where you'll have to decide whether you're going to be honest about it or not. And so the book really centers around that idea, and the discrimination was the catalyst for that one.
Right, and that's a great example of that discrimination, because what if you were, the Catholic person that had a Bible study and you had this up on the internet and you claimed that you just getting away from God is what was wrong in this country, you'd have been fine. I mean, and everyone has to concede that argument that a theist belief and an atheist belief are not accepted the same.
Yes, I brought it up in the meeting with the Dean of Admissions. I said, what if I was a Christian missionary who, in the summers, I went to other countries and passed out Bibles and tried to convert them, and I had a website for it and stuff like that? Would that be the definition of a Christian activist? But I see them in this program all the time. This is a secular religious studies program. It's not from a religious school. It's from a public school. And she had no answer for that. She just repeated herself about me not fitting in with the department's milieu, and then I left and exchanged a couple emails and then ended up writing about it. But yeah, I brought up that argument, and no, nobody has been able to answer that satisfactorily to me at all.
And I think they're going to have a hard time. I agree.
We've already talked about your laissez-faire attitude towards religion and the fact that you think it should be allowed to continue to exist for the good that it does. But conversely, you do seem to think that it's important for atheists to come out, I would assume, by the title of the book and what you say the book is about. Is that true? Is it important for atheists to become more openly secular?
Oh, it's incredibly important so that instances like that don't happen in the future, because if more people understood what atheism is and what it's not, and that anybody could be an atheist, your postman, your neighbor, your daughter, whatever it is, if more people come out, then more people see that that's not a threatening position to have. The Dean of Admissions who I dealt with happened to come from a theology school. So she came from an environment where an atheist wouldn't be allowed in because it's a private institution for Christianity. But once she moved to a public domain, she didn't understand that that's no longer acceptable. And by more people coming out, more people talking about it, then that might not have happened. Maybe she would say, oh, my daughter's an atheist. I hate atheists. I just thought I did before, and it'd make it easier on other people in the future. So I'm a huge advocate of that, yes.
Yeah, especially when you have an evidence-based field. I was surprised to find out when I took my Theology 101 class at Notre Dame that I had a Protestant professor. But again, he's totally qualified to teach evidence-based stuff. It wasn't about, the dogma, but rather things that could be evidentially shown to be true, like the Gospels and when they were written and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We want to remind everyone to like us on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Tumblr, and StumbleUpon. Also, meetup.com, where you can join and suggest a mashup of your own. It's the Milwaukee Atheists, Skeptics, and Humanists page, and we do all kinds of get-togethers to have fun with like-minded secular thinkers. Also, we are pushing our membership. You get a free ticket to the conference if you buy a Mythicist Milwaukee membership. It's $75 a year or $8 a month. Two great options to help support the cause. We're talking to David McAfee. He's written 3 books. You got a new book coming up, or what's the most recent?
Yep. The last book I wrote was the Belief book, which is for children, and it helps explain belief and religion the most basic level. I like to recommend it to adults as well, especially people who don't understand where religion comes from. Maybe they think that because of all the bizarre stories from a long time ago that there must have been alien intervention or divine intervention or something like that. So my goal with that book was to show kids and adults alike that religion didn't need any sort of supernatural or otherworldly catalyst, because it was in us all the time. It's in our stories. It's in our need to explain the unknown. It's in our pattern-seeking behavior, and it was created as a result of all those things. And so in the book, in a very, I hope, simple way, I try to show how stories turn to beliefs, and then when told over generations and generations, they turn into really, really firmly held beliefs that then take over cultures and then grow from there. And so that book has done great. I've gotten amazing feedback on it. I've been very happy with seeing kids holding the book and pictures sent to my Facebook and stuff, and it's been awesome. And now we're working on, Chuck and I, the illustrator, co-writer of the Belief book, are working on a sequel called The Book of the Gods, and that should be out before Christmas. And it's basically going to be a trip around the world to learn about all sorts of different gods that you may not have heard of, to show that it's not all the one Yahweh deity that a lot of people hear about in certain cultures. And it's not about Allah. Deities are very common throughout history, and so I wanted to show how those come about, how we project ourselves onto gods from the Greek culture to our own gods today. They do things because we're creating them. So the Book of the Gods is going to be, that's a pretty fun one for me so far.
Don't you think this information should be in the curriculum for elementary school kids? And is it a conspiracy that they only teach a couple of mythologies? Is that not a coincidence in order to keep kids from questioning the Judeo-Christian myth arc?
I want comprehensive religious studies in school. I fight for that all the time. I've written essays for Richard Dawkins Foundation. I've done speeches on why and how we should teach religion to children. I don't think it's a conspiracy as much as it's a byproduct of the separation of church and state, actually. Because I think people falsely believe that they can't teach religion in schools, in public elementary schools or high schools, because we have the separation of church and state. A lot of schools have taken the approach of no religion in general. We won't talk about it at all. We'll leave that for them to discuss at home. And for me, that's the worst possible decision, because religion's a part of history and it's a part of today. So if you don't teach kids about it and leave them to only learn about it from their parents, who may or may not already have very biased beliefs, it just doesn't make sense. And more than anything, you can look at countries, especially in Europe, that have comprehensive religious education and how they learn about all religions or a majority of major religions from an early age. And then you can compare the statistics for how religious those people grow up to be, and it's night and day. America is falling behind in that area more than anything. So if we took some lessons from other countries and beefed up our religious education in schools exactly as you're saying, It's going to educate people more in general, which is always a good thing no matter what, and then indirectly lead to more people rejecting religion because they're going to see that that's not the one true way. There's all these different thought processes that go into it.
I love to hear you say that, and I think it's two questions actually. What you're talking about is teaching religion to younger kids, world religion in school, which I agree with completely. But the other issue is the mythology that does get taught in school, Greek and Norse in my case, is easily, or at least the topics that they touch on in Greek mythology are easily dismissed as dead religions. Whereas if you taught them religions that more closely parallel the Judeo-Christian myth arc, kids would be more apt to question the validity of a myth system that was obviously based on other ones. That's what I meant by kind of a conspiracy in the curriculum.
Yeah, and I agree that that's exactly the result. It doesn't make sense that we separate mythology from religion anyway. I mean, in my studies, when I majored in religious studies, there was no separation between the ancient Greek myths and current Christianity. They were looked at with the same lens and through the same light, and I think that should be taught everywhere, because the only thing that separates them is time from acceptance. Right now, we don't en masse believe in the Greek myths, so it's okay to classify it as mythology. But factually speaking, if you look at every checklist, every mark, they're all mythology and they're all religion. They're one and the same. And so to separate them does cause a lot of problems, and I can't speak to the reasons behind that. In my school, all we did was study mythology. I don't remember anything about Christianity or anything else, really. I just remember ancient myths and then history, and we really kind of brushed over the religious stuff entirely, which made me, again, more interested and more willing to pursue those studies outside of my school.
Do you have any?
Go ahead.
Do you have any sense that Santa Barbara is a little more progressive in that area? Because where I went to school, you couldn't say that. It was there were clearly a difference between religions that are still being practiced and mythologies that had gone by. Well, you think maybe that's an exception there?
If you go to any college that has a secular religious studies program, that should be how it's taught, because there's no objective reason not to teach it that way. I don't know how other colleges would how each one individually addresses those questions, but I do know that I've looked at a number of curriculums across different campuses, and as long as they're public universities, they tend to teach the accepted answers from religious studies scholars and professors, and those don't separate between Christianity and ancient mythology. But that's also a college program, and you have to go through a lot to eventually get there. In high schools and below, I'm sure that there's a lot of separation because of bias in the teachers' agendas and stuff like that. But religious at UC Santa Barbara, they did have, when I went there, at least one of the best religious studies programs in the United States. So it could be that it is the exception. They do it extraordinarily well. But if you find a public university that's teaching otherwise, I'd like to hear about it so that I can petition them and so that I can bring light to that issue.
Well, I think it might be able to be pulled off at the university level, but if you tried to do it at the high school level, I could imagine trying to get an agreement on what Christianity is, what Islam is, what Hinduism and a whole host of other religions actually are. Just getting the book written would be half the battle. There would be an enormous fight.
Well, it's definitely part of what I'm working on right now. I'm putting together a religious studies curriculum right now that will be used in programs in the United States, starting at the elementary level and hopefully growing from there. One of the groups that I'm working with right now is Houston Oasis, which is what a lot of people have called an atheist church, but it's just a gathering area in Houston, Texas. And they right now use my books during their studies, during their daycare section of their meetings, and I'm working with them to hopefully present a full curriculum that can actually help them teach their kids about religions from a secular viewpoint and therefore academic viewpoint.
How do you deal with maybe the claim that you're pro-atheist? Because you're saying by teaching this, there's probably going to be less people maybe buying into it, or certainly being less fundamentalist. How would you argue that if somebody said, nah, but you're clearly just pro-atheist, so in a way you're pushing a religion?
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. Unfortunately, for people who make that argument, though, the statistics prove that I'm right. It's just an objective fact that knowing more about religion leads you to be less religious. I never say whether that's my desired result or not. I want people to know about the facts, and if the facts happen to make them be less religious, then that's great. But I just want to give them the facts. And like I said before, the statistics show that if they have all that information and they know all those answers, then the likelihood of them being religious is lower. And generally, for me, that's a good thing. But I don't think that it really matters when looking at what I do, because I don't say in my books or in any of my writings to kids that they should be atheists. I don't mention the words atheism or atheist in the belief book at all. It's just about religions and where they come from, and it's all kind of distilled from my college courses. So there's not much that you can point out that would be biased towards atheism in any way. But I do welcome those kinds of arguments, because it gives me a chance to point out that I'm just stating statistical facts. I'm not making any sort of opinion-based argument when I talk about that.
Right. That's a good answer. I enjoyed it. I guess the follow-up might be then, what are the facts? And that you imagine you'll probably get some argument there as well.
What are the facts? Well,
yeah.
The facts are that statistically we can look at the religious studies levels of each country and then judge their religiosity, and through surveys, and look that there is a strong correlation in every single country between religious education and non-religiosity. And that's not something that you can really argue with once you look at all the data.
Wow.
Of course, your mission goes right along with that of Mythicist Milwaukee about exposition of truth and an emphasis on research and education, and let people come to their own conclusions from there. If if faith works for them, we're not about trying to pry anybody out of that. But we are about trying to get atheists to go ahead and stand up and be spoken for. And in that regard, a great article came out in Milwaukee Magazine, and we want to mention it because it's been making a splash. Mario Quadracci here locally wrote a great article
called Faith No More.
Called Faith No More, and it's in this month's release of this month's edition of Milwaukee Magazine, available now. And we were happy to actually get the notice of Sam Harris, who tweeted the link to the article. So we're patting ourselves on the back over that. But I wanted to fit that in. Milwaukee Magazine, check it out, MilwaukeeMagazine.com. And sign up for our own newsletter at mythicistmilwaukee.com. We just got a few more minutes. We're talking to David McAfee. I don't suppose there's anything you can do about the security issues on my computer, Mr. McAfee?
No, I can't help you with those, unfortunately.
Well, here's the true irony: is that McAfee is actually a raging conspiracy theorist, and we're talking to a rationalist.
Yeah, I get all kinds of messages on my fan page and in my email asking me if I really murdered someone, asking me all these crazy questions, asking me if the only reason that I am pursuing, why I'm writing books is to, I don't even remember the allegation that somehow I'm in league with this guy I'm related to, John McAfee. I'm not related to him, by the way, but in their argument, I'm related to him and using his money to try and bring people away from God or something like that. It's very interesting.
Wow, that's a stretch. That's great. What is the age for the belief book? What's your target age?
Our target age, we like to say, is between 4 and 104, because anyone can really read it as long as it's being younger kids between 4 and 6 or so. It's for parents to kind of read to them and show them the basics over time. And then we wrote it we proofread it with a 7-year-old, with Chuck's son, who read each line and made sure that it was able to be read by him. So about 7 is when they can read it themselves. Before that, you can read it to them. And up until adulthood, I've recommended it to all sorts of people who have told me they didn't understand where religion came from. I said, this is a really basic explanation. It's not condescending or anything. It just explains it in a very simple way. how religious studies scholars see religion as a cultural and human phenomenon.
All right, very good, very good.
Do you have kids yourself?
I do not. No, this is my way of helping educate children and raise children, is by writing the kids' books, but I don't plan to have any kids myself.
Well, he is 26, so.
He doesn't plan on having any kids, he says. He's 26, he's got no idea. The best laid plans, my friend. I'm wondering, though, what would be your, maybe you don't have an opinion since you're not planning on having kids, but what would be your take? Would you have a kind of a hands-off approach and do what you suggest the schools do and teach them about everything, or would you just let it sort of happen to them? I do have two little kids. So
definitely not. I would be extremely proactive. I would teach about religion as soon as they start asking questions, which for a lot of kids is a lot younger than people realize. They might ask, why does grandma talk to her food before eating? Or they might ask, why did this person at school threaten me to hell, or something like that. And it gives you the opportunity as a parent to then explain these systems, where they come from, why your friend is saying this. Even though he's a good person, he might just be tainted with these bad ideas. So yeah, I'd be extremely proactive in teaching them about all sorts of religions, going to the most interesting one, teaching them anything they had questions about. That to me is, I've said before that if you kids about religion from a historical and phenomenological approach, then somebody else will teach them religion. They'll learn about it on the streets, is what I say. So,
that's a good point.
Meaning anybody, they could learn from Christianity from their good friend who happens to be a Christian, and then they decide that that's the one true religion. And because you didn't give them a proper education about where religions come from, then they'd be inclined to believe it.
Right. That's like learning physics from Deepak Chopra. Not a good idea.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where I get all my quantum physics knowledge.
Why does Grandma talk to her food? That's funny. I think although you have a sort of a hands-off attitude towards religion, and maybe it does some good, it sounds like you got a little bit of an edge to you. You don't mind making fun of it. Can religion stand to be ridiculed? Is that okay?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I think all ideas can stand to be ridiculed. I'm against any sort of blasphemy law or any sort of problem that people have with criticism in general. I said recently on my Facebook page, if a writer's criticisms of your ideas are a real threat to your belief system, then it's probably not the criticisms that are the problem. I'm really in favor of any sort of criticism. I don't like baseless, offensive, like there's no point other than being mean to people. That's not something that I advocate for, but I also wouldn't censor that on my Facebook page. I don't ever censor any comments. I don't have a problem with people saying whatever's on their mind, but I do try to foster a place for rational thought as opposed